Is to take your word.
Yeah.
One of the big ideas, of course, to come out of the strategic reassessment was that you can't kill or capture your way out of the problem. Right. So if you take that big idea and you operationalize it, what does that look like tactically? How does that then drive all the way down to the local village level?
Well, let me illustrate actually something. In fact, we showed it on Capitol Hill. It's called the Anaconda slide, because it illustrates the point I was trying to make on that particular day was that, again, it takes more than just counter-terrorist forces to deal with al-Qaeda in Iraq. So this is how we conceptualized what we were doing. This is, again, for a specific element, specific enemy in Iraq. It was the al-Qaeda and associated movements inside Iraq. These elements right here, and there are a whole bunch of different groups in addition to AQI, but AQI was the biggest. Answer, I'll soon a second. Next. Now, these elements require these qualities, these items to sustain their activities. Obviously, they got to have a flow of weapons and explosives because they're using that up. They often need foreign fighters. In Iraq, there were somewhere around 120 foreign fighters a month at the height of it coming in through Syria. Very serious problem because a number of them were blowing themselves up. Now it's down to under 10 or so per month. They've got to have areas in which they can plan, perform medical care, rehabilitate, take a break, and so forth, do some training. And so that's the safe havens. They've got to have some degree of popular support so they can move freely throughout different areas. There's typically some form of ideology, certainly an extremist ideology in the case of al-Qaeda. They have to be able to communicate and direct their forces, command and control. Money is the oxygen in these movements. In fact, truthfully, a lot of what they do is about money. There are, don't get me wrong, at the top of these organizations, there are true believers, but an awful lot of the rest of it is just about money and power. And then they typically have a link. Al-Qaeda in Iraq certainly had a link to al-Qaeda senior leadership in the border areas of Pakistan. Now, what we had to do was put pressure on all of these, all of their needs. We had to try to take them away, challenge them, reduce their access to them. Next. And so we have to do it simultaneously. And the point I was trying to make on Capitol Hill, this is back in September 2007 in the testimony back then, it was that it takes more than just military forces to do this, and specifically more than just counter-terrorist forces. Next. Now, you do need counter-terrorist forces, and indeed, we killed or captured a substantial number of the worst of the worst of al-Qaeda, including Zarqawi, who was the best leader that they had in Iraq. It takes conventional forces to take away the safe havens and sanctuaries and deny them from the enemy. So not just clear and leave, but clear and hold. That was another one of the big ideas, obviously, is that you just couldn't go into an area, disrupt it, get the enemy out, and then leave it. If you do, the enemy will come back. You had to stay in it. So this is, again, living with the people. And then, obviously, over time, we wanted to get more and more Iraqi conventional and special ops forces. And then we were able to get something called Sons of Iraq. Ultimately, had 103,000 of these individuals working for us on our payroll. These are basically local men who wanted to help keep al-Qaeda out of their area. Actually, we had some that were also hired to keep the militia out because there was also another Anaconda slide for the Shia extremist threat, this being the Sunni extremist threat primarily. Next, but it takes much more than that. It took politics. You have to get into that. These tribal awakenings were what produced the Sons of Iraq. This is where we linked up with tribes and we said, we will support you if you want to get al-Qaeda out of your area, or we'll even do it for you, which is typically what had to happen, or we did it together. And so that was what led to this pool of men. It also led to volunteers for the military and so on. And then you solidify that with reconciliation that actually is codified in law, hopefully, certainly in policies. The Iraqis had a reconciliation commission and so forth over time. And needless to say, we're constantly on the lookout for Sunni, Shia, Arab, Kurd, and other types of tensions that could produce more violence. And so, again, you have to be very much in tune with that. And by the way, of course, it has to be a civil-military effort. And Ambassador Crocker and I published a civil-military campaign plan very early on, after agreeing that we were going to achieve unity of effort in what we did between the embassy and the multinational force Iraq. Next. Intelligence drives everything. We've had breakthroughs in every discipline of intelligence including, of course, the proliferation of unmanned aerial vehicles that give us full motion video and various signals intelligence packages and a variety of other tools. But the fact is, it wasn't the breakthrough in any one discipline that was key. It was a fusion of all those. The real breakthrough was infusing the products of all of the different intelligence disciplines. And we actually created fusion cells, fusion centers. We had a big, huge room. We made the conventional forces, the special mission units, the special forces, the CIA, DIA, NSA, NGA, coalition elements, host nation reps, all sit in the same room, all with their feeds, their pipes, their communications, their digits, their screens and everything else. And they had to sit together, and we didn't allow barriers, no walls, and they actually had to talk together. And it was amazing what happened when they did that. Next. Detainee operations were a big deal. We had 27,000 detainees at the height of this. I stopped the release of detainees when I first got there because it was a catch and release program. We were basically not creating the conditions in which our soldiers could live their values. If they thought the guy's going to be back out on the street within a few days, they might not take his surrender the next time. Not a good position to be in. And so we reformed our detainee operations. We did rehabilitation of the detainees. We dramatically reduced the recidivism rate of those who were released. We're now down to somewhere around 5,500 detainees and coming down and about to transfer a couple thousand more to the Iraqis. It's really been quite a considerable success, I think, especially considering where we were in the challenges. I mean, we basically were running terrorist university. We didn't know who the hardest of the hardcore were. They would run these enclosures of 800 people, and they were turning what were probably moderate bad guys into very bad guys right there underneath our eyes. And so we had to get some counterintelligence in there. We had to understand inside the wire what was happening, just as we were seeking to understand what was going on outside the wire. You have to identify who the irreconcilables are, and they have to be removed from the rest of the population. Next. Now, at the end of the day, you have to also help the host nation try to come to grips with the reasons why people might be drawn to extremism in the first place. And that's this whole issue of inadequate opportunity, basically. Lack of decent education, lack of basic services, inadequate employment opportunities, and all the rest of that. And we got engaged, again, with our civilian counterparts and with our host nation counterparts and worked those. Next. And then you had to work outside the country. We worked through secondary countries to get to Syria. We worked with source countries through the State Department Counterterrorist Office to try to make it harder for military-age males to fly in a one-way ticket from these different countries to Damascus, from which they would go into Iraq. And that also helped out a great deal, tightened up the borders. And then you have to get active in the information campaign. The fact is, we did not have an adequate information operations task force at all. We basically just had a public affairs apparatus, and that was not sufficient. You have to have something that the members of Congress down here would know and recognize as actually a political campaign organization of a substantial campaign. And you have to have media monitoring. You have to try. We were first with the truth was our objective. We weren't about spin. In fact, I refused to put lipstick on pigs. In the spring of 2007, folks would say, hey, you're making progress. Why don't you go out and tell people? I said, we'll let the press discover it. I said, the most important commodity we have right now is our credibility, and I am not going to risk it by prematurely announcing what appears to be progress. When it happens, they'll see it. In fact, an old boss of mine came out, put his arm around my shoulder. This is as late as July of 2007, I think, and said, you know, I'm starting to see some good stuff happening here, all the rest of that. He said, I think there's a perceptions problem out here. And I said, sir, with all due respect, what we have is a results problem. And as the results keep getting better, those perceptions will change, and we'll let that happen. But you have to get active in that. One of the big issues that I think, in fact, Congress is trying to come to grips with this, so is the executive branch and military services, is what should we be doing in cyberspace? Cyberspace is a battlefield. People are out there competing. They are fighting in cyberspace. It's a battle of ideas. People are proselytizing. It's how the Yemeni American cleric Anwar al-Awlaki in Yemen was able to reach out and touch some of the individuals. Some were attracted to him the alleged, the Fort Hood doctor, for example, the Detroit bomber, and so on. So we've got to figure out how we're going to operate there, how much more active can we be while still, again, obviously maintaining First Amendment rights and other very important basic freedoms. But this is what it takes. It takes a whole of government's approach. And that, again, is the biggest of the big ideas about the overall effort, because you can draw this out now and make it a regional approach, and that's what we have sought to do when it comes to combating extremism in the overall area of responsibility, something that we generally assess as having made some progress over the course of the last year in diminishing al-Qaeda overall, albeit with growth down in Yemen, although Yemeni authorities certainly have addressed some of that since the strikes in December and some other operations.
Well, sir, I think it's clear that it does take a coordinated